How many times does a woman have to stitch silence inside herself just to keep from falling apart on the outside? Anne had spent a lifetime doing just that, swallowing abandonment with her morning coffee, raising a daughter with the strength of someone who bleeds quietly. But that Saturday, standing in front of a flowered altar and empty promises, the past came back, clean-shaven, smiling like a mannequin, wearing a suit worth more than years of her life. And right there, in the middle of the church, she knew the nightmare had a name and was about to marry someone else. His name was James Whip, and he had no idea that the little girl in her arms was his. The same man who vanished on a warm summer night, taking with him every unspoken word, now stood smiling like life was spotless. Like hearts didn't break in silence. Anne froze. It was as if God had slowed time, just to make sure she felt it all. Every memory. But this story isn't just about what he did. It's about what she refused to let die. About courage buried beneath diapers and sleepless nights. About the moment when that child, the one who carried Anne's eyes and fears, looked up at the groom and called out, "Daddy." That was the moment the floor beneath the ceremony gave way. Because some truths the kind time tries to bury are shouted by children without even knowing what they carry in their chests. This isn't a story about revenge. No guns in purses. No dramatic schemes. It's about a woman named Anne, ordinary to the world, invisible in shiny ballrooms, but immense on the inside. A woman who held in her arms the only thing powerful enough to shake an entire dynasty. The truth. Not the headline kind of truth, but the one that pulses in silence, grows in the dark, and one day explodes in plain sight. James came from a family that mistook power for purity and money for fate. But Anne had something that not even the whole Whitmore empire could erase: their daughter, a secret wrapped in diapers, tears, and broken promises. And while the world forgot him, she remembered. She stitched every memory into the girl's eyes, trying to protect her from a truth that would, sooner or later, come knocking in polished shoes and false vows. Think you've seen a dramatic plot twist? Think again. Because nothing in fiction compares to the moment when a child breaks protocol, rips open a heart, and calls a stranger dad, in front of the bride at the altar, with bells ringing in the background. That was the moment their perfect world fell apart, and the real one began. Now tell me, what would you do if the person who once shattered your heart was about to do the same to someone else? Without even knowing they left a life behind. While James raised champagne flutes and signed deals, Anne juggled unpaid bills and questions she never got to ask. How did he sleep at night? Did he ever think of her? If he knew about the child, would anything have been different? The worst part wasn't the abandonment. It was being forgotten. Life kept spinning for him, with fancy dinners and new rings. Foreign. Time froze. Every birthday was a reminder of who should have been there. Every smile her daughter gave held the shape of a face that never came back. But Anne didn't stop. She gathered her broken pieces and built a shelter out of what was left. Courage, love, and a silence that screamed. So that day, seeing James smile beside another woman, about to promise forever as if he'd never left, wasn't just painful. It was unjust. Because sometimes, the deepest wounds come not from what people do to us, but from what they choose to ignore. And standing at that altar, Anne knew if she stayed silent, another life would be wounded without ever knowing why. It was a cloudy Saturday, and the church bells rang like a warning dressed as a blessing. Anne arrived early, Ellie in her arms, but paused on the sidewalk as if stepping onto a place where time hadn't moved. Her dress had lost its color, but not its memories. As guests entered laughing, dressed in light fabrics and sweet perfume, Anne felt a chill that didn't come from the weather. It came from the memory now walking toward her. The contrast was brutal. The white orchids at the entrance seemed to mock her faded dress. That world belongs to a different kind of beauty. The kind that excludes, that punishes those from the outside. Anne clutched Ellie to her chest, as if she could shield her from something that had already begun. Then she saw him. Between a photographer's flash and the scent of lavender, there he was. James. Same crooked smile, but eyes that didn't look the same anymore. For a moment, everything stopped, and felt her body tremble. Not from fear, but from a kind of vertigo. Only those who've lost everything can recognize. The altar looked like an expensive stage for a story that started on a forgotten rooftop. And in the face of that impossible vision, she realized she wasn't ready. No one ever is. No one's ready to face the love that left and returned like nothing had happened. Ellie's tiny fingers gripped her mother's necklace, as if sensing something big was about to unfold. The necklace was old, its beads dull with time, but it gleamed in that moment like a relic of all Anne had tried to forget. The murmurs of guests blended with the muffled bells, but inside her, only silence. A silence that burned like a scream locked in her chest. And there, between a shaky breath and the perfume of expensive flowers, Anne froze. A narrator seemed to whisper inside her head. She thought he had disappeared, but there he was, marrying someone else. It was as if someone were narrating her pain in real time, like a cassette tape of suffocated memories rewinding itself. The words hit slowly, echoing off stained glass and the uneven rhythm of her heart. Anne couldn't move. Her legs were cemented to the floor, and her eyes locked on him. It was that same old fear, the kind that has no name, only a scent. The scent of church flowers, starched lace, and absence. The kind of fear that knots in your stomach and stays. Anat felt the past knocking on the door, wearing white gloves and wedding music. She didn't know whether to scream, to run, or to collapse right there in front of everyone. But something inside told her it wasn't time to flee. The bride's veil floated in the air like a happy ghost, but it was James's gaze that tore time in half. He saw her, not like someone sees a familiar face, but like seeing a ghost from the past walking through the present, holding a child in a worn dress. His eyes locked with Anne's, and in that second, the world lost its sound. No bells, no laughter, no choir, just a vacuum between two hearts that recognized each other too late. James staggered back a step, and for a split second, the mask slipped and held her breath, her chest on fire, as if reliving every minute he took with him that night. Ellie watched the two of them, confused, her brow furrowed like a child sensing what she couldn't yet name. She tugged at the necklace again, as if something was bothering her. Maybe the invisible weight of that unspoken exchange no one else around them noticed. Then the wind blew, hard, sudden, restless, a gust that shook flowers, veils, and certainties. Anne felt it like a warning from her own soul. Something was about to collapse, and when fate blows that way, it's not too cool. It's to test foundations. Inside, she trembled like the sacristy curtains. On the outside, she tried to look like just another staff member, but something in that silent exchange had already shattered and there was no turning back. It was summer, and the heat clung to the skin like a stubborn memory. Anne was cleaning hotel rooms that smelled like lemon and damp carpet, carrying the bucket like it was her own fate, without knowing it. The hallways were long, the smiles rushed, and the feeling of being invisible, constant. But that night, a golden door left half open held more than luxury. It held a turning point, even if she didn't know it yet, pushing that cart down the hall. The ballroom buzzed with polished laughter, clinking glasses, and music that played only for those who knew how to hold their chin high, and slipped through corners like a trained shadow, until she bumped into him, his suit rumpled, his glass nearly empty, and a look in his eyes like he couldn't breathe in a place where everyone was suffocating on themselves. She whispered an apology and looked down, but he didn't move. He stayed, staring as if seeing someone for the very first time. James Whit, young, wealthy, heir to a name that opened doors before they were even knocked on. But that night he didn't look like royalty, he looked shipwrecked, a man drifting in a sea of appearances, and then, without knowing why, felt something strange in her chest. The urge to stay just one more second, just to see if maybe he was broken too, or if it was just the lights lying again. Out on the rooftop, the world seemed to have kicked off its shoes and gone silent. The lights hung like warm fireflies pretending to be stars, and the sound of the ocean came from afar, like a forgotten lullaby. James leaned against the railing, glass dangling from his fingers, and Anne stood at a safe distance, but close enough to hear. He spoke slowly, like someone unloading secrets without realizing it, each one loosened by the champagne. She listened with a soul worn thin, not wanting to judge. All she wanted was to feel like, just for one night, she was more than a name tag. His eyes searched hers, maybe for relief, maybe for shelter. Their hands touched by accident as they reached for the same rail, and the jolt was instant. There was no logic, no script, just two strangers too broken to pretend they were whole, and in that moment, even the silence felt like an accomplice. The salty breeze lifted Anne's hair, like it was announcing the beginning of something, or maybe the end of something that no longer made sense. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to store that moment away, a sliver of time where the world didn't scream. It only whispered, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile, as if that balcony wasn't just part of a hotel, but a place outside time, where the impossible almost could exist. The city glittered far below, like a necklace of lights that belonged to neither of them. But there on that rooftop suspended between worlds, there was only stillness. The shy kisses from minutes ago were now urgent, like time had run out, and trembled, not from fear, but from the electricity that surges when the body moves faster than the heart. James whispered that he wanted to run away, that all of it, the duties, the dinners, the expectations, was choking him. She didn't reply. She just held him. There was something in that embrace that wasn't physical. It was a silent pact between two wounded souls. Neither knew what to call what they were feeling, and maybe that's what made it so real. The moon looked bigger that night, full and complicit, a quiet witness. Anne closed her eyes when he touched her gently, like he was asking for permission to exist. In that midnight heat, with bodies tangled and thoughts floating, they gave in, not to love, but to escape. But every escape has a ticking clock. When the sun crept in, spilling golden light through the curtains, Anne woke up alone. The pillows still warm, the glass empty on the balcony, and a silence that felt different, not like the night before. This was absence. She sat up, hugging her knees like she could somehow rewind time with her body. But it was too late. He was gone, and with him a part of her she didn't even know existed. The nausea came out of nowhere, hitting her mid-ride as she clutched him up on the bus like it was her last thread of sanity. She thought it was just the heat, or another sleepless night, until the queasiness became routine, and the doubt became fear. It was in a cramped bathroom, walls damp and light flickering, that the truth appeared. The test, bought with the last coins in her wallet, showed 2 pink lines, and her heart, once hardened like stone, turned into a wild drum. Anne tried to deny it. She counted days, recalculated, closed her eyes. But the delay wasn't coincidence, and James's face, the one she tried so hard to erase, came rushing back with every heartbeat. She tried calling once, twice, 10 times. Every number was dead. "This number does not exist," the operator said. But what echoed was, "You've been forgotten." Desperate, she went back to the hotel where it all started. The answer came in a laugh, one of those that marks a poor girl with dreams too big. "You, with him," the receptionist said, smirking. "You must be dreaming, sweetheart." And there, in that polished lobby, Anne felt shame crawl up her legs like a fever. There was nothing to say. No explanation would be enough. The only certainty was now living inside her, small, invisible, but real. And in that tiled silence, coated in pity and condescension, she realized she couldn't count on anyone, only herself. The months that followed felt like walking barefoot on glass. Her belly grew each day, but instead of hands, it was met with harsh stares. Her boss, with that syrupy voice laced in poison, suggested she'll find the real father, as if the blame lived only in her womb. The supervisor called her a public image issue and snipped her badge like he was erasing her existence, and slipped one more rung down the invisible ladder of society's indifference. But she didn't fall. She barely slept, ate what was left behind, sewed clothes in exchange for coins that could hardly buy milk. She scrubbed bathrooms at 3 in the morning, the world's silence screaming inside her. Every shift reminded her no one was coming to save her, but there was someone growing inside her, and that was everything. At night, lying on a thin mattress wrapped more in faith than blankets, her mind wandered back to that rooftop. That night felt like a beautiful hallucination, but it was real, and the truth moved inside her, with tiny kicks, soft hiccups, sleepy breaths, and placed her hand over her belly like she was holding a sacred secret. This wasn't just pregnancy. It was the thread keeping her upright. It was proof that even in abandonment, she could still create love. And no matter what the world said, she knew what was growing inside her wasn't shame. It was hope. Every heartbeat of the baby felt like a knock on the door of the past, a constant reminder that he existed, that the night under the stars wasn't just a lonely mind making things up. And felt the baby's movements like answers, little nudges whispering, "I'm here, mommy." And even without a face to connect it to, she knew whose blood was flowing inside. The pain of being forgotten mixed with a silent promise. Her daughter would never carry that same void. When it came time to choose a name, Anne didn't follow trends or traditions. She wanted something that could be both memory and seed, a name that could remember the night she was conceived, and still announce the possibility of a future. She named her Ellie Grace, Grace and Light. Then between cheap diapers, watered-down soup, and sleepless nights, Anne learned to survive with almost nothing. Less money, fewer dreams, no guarantees, but more strength than she ever thought she had. Time passed like heavy cleaning, slow and exhausting. And then, one ordinary late afternoon, with sunlight slanting through the kitchen window, and heard a different kind of knock at the door. It was a white envelope, no return address, which is a golden seal that mocked the simplicity of the home she lived in. It was Destiny's first whisper after years of silence. The envelope lay on the table like a luxurious mistake. No sender, just a gold seal and elegant script refined to belong anywhere near a kitchen where milk was measured by the ounce. And I thought of tearing it up unread, convinced it was either a scam or a mix. But before she could, Ellie picked it up with shining eyes. "Mommy, look. It looks like something from a princess," she said, holding it like it was an invite to an enchanted ball. Inside, a firm, perfumed piece of paper with words straight out of a movie. "We invite you to work as a nanny for a private ceremony, filling in for an unavailable professional, seeking someone reliable, discreet, and experienced." Anne read the sentence 3 times. The pay was more than she made in a month sewing. But something in that handwriting, that elegant, looping script, felt familiar, a sweet and silent discomfort. Like a memory the skin remembers before the mind does. Her instinct said no, but necessity shouted louder, like it always did. She took a deep breath, looked at her daughter, and forced a smile. "It's just a job, Ellie, one night only." And with a heart wrapped in an old handkerchief of fear, Anne said yes. Not to the job, but to the fate that had returned, now wearing white gloves and a promise disguised as opportunity, and arrived holding Ellie's hand tightly, as if that tiny palm was her anchor in a sea of porcelain and glass. The mansion looked like a fairy tale bought at full price. White columns like sugar, spiral staircases with no visible end, and the sweet scent of fresh flowers choke in the air. Staff rushed around with earpieces, floral arrangements looked unreal, and then she tried to disappear between the cracks of all that beauty. Her dress was clean, but old. Her shoes were tight in that way that tells a story just by how they pinch. Every step echoed like a confession. Nothing about him blended in, not from lack of effort, but from too much reality. While Ellie gazed up in wonder at the towering chandeliers and thought only about how to slip out without leaving a trace. It's just one night, she repeated to herself. A deal with her own soul. One shift, then back to the world she knew, where there were no violins, no marble staircases. But something in that staircase seemed to be watching, as if the house itself sensed a secret had walked in, and tightened her grip on Ellie's hand and lowered her gaze. She didn't belong there, didn't want to be part of anyone's story. But fate, when it wants to be ironic, chooses the prettiest stages for the ugliest truths, and she was about to be reminded of that in the worst possible way. Then she saw him, between a toast and a flash. He appeared, in a light grey suit, freshly shaved, with that rehearsed smile. James Whitmore walked beside the bride like he was born at the altar. The glass in his hand didn't tremble, it was steady, confident, untouchable. But for Anne, the world stopped spinning. That silhouette, the one that had haunted her dreams and her nightmares, was real again. Too real. Flesh, bone, and silence. Time warped around her. The lights in the hall grew too bright, then too dim. The music became static. Anne's whole body shook, like she was back on the rooftop. But now there was no moon, no wind, no refuge. The ground beneath her the past had come down the stairs, and was smiling at another woman, like nothing had ever happened, like she had never existed, like Ellie had never been born. Anne's heart beat like a war drum, faster than any labor she'd ever heard of, more intense than any pain she had endured. But this wasn't longing, it wasn't grief, it was rupture, implosion. The exact moment when the wound she had tried to seal for years was ripped wide open by a glance. And the worst part, he was still handsome as he was reckless. Then the bride appeared, a silk-wrapped hurricane. Every step was a performance. Her heels echoed like a sentence across the polished marble. Her laugh, metallic and trained, cut through the air with practiced arrogance. Her perfume was too sweet, cloying like falseness sealed in crystal. I knew the type, someone who had learned to win without ever needing to fight. The bride was the daughter of the company's owners, raised among champagne flutes and red carpets. She knew her beauty, and how to use it. The hall seemed to bow to her. Staff lowered their eyes. The flowers bloomed only for her, and then, with her quickly tailored uniform, felt every seam tightened like an accusation. The brightest world was one of control, and Anne was just a speck that had gone unnoticed for too long. When their paths crossed in the hallway, the moment lasted only 3 seconds, but it felt like a timed humiliation. The bride wrinkled her nose, like someone spotting something out of place, a thing that dared to exist where it didn't belong, and held her gaze for a second, then dropped it, not out of fear, but because she knew that woman would never really see her. Never. To her, Anne was dust, but dust remembers, and sometimes memory comes back like a storm. You there? Fix those bows, they're crooked. The voice came sharp, precise, like a silk whip, and stopped, lowered her eyes, and obeyed in silence. Ellie, sensing the tone, hid behind her mother's legs, clutching her dress with both hands. That small gesture made him tremble inside. The urge to speak back burned in her throat like swallowed fire, but she held it down. She'd had practiced, swallowing the world whole without chewing. It wasn't the first time she'd been treated like a thing, but it was the first time it happened so close to James, so close to the man who once held her hand on that rooftop and made her believe, for a few short hours, that she was seen. The silence of humiliation weighed heavier than a slap, more than any insult, because now innocent eyes were watching, and even if she didn't understand, Ellie felt it, and that hurt more than anything. The bride, satisfied, let out a short laugh and walked down the hallway like she was stepping on rose petals. She didn't even glance back. They didn't realize the past was just inches away, alive, pulsing, hidden behind a crooked bow and silent pride. Anne stood up slowly, said nothing. But inside, something cracked, like glass that hasn't shattered yet, but is beyond saving. The worst part wasn't her voice, or her rehearsed gestures. It was how the whole world spun around her, like she was the sun and everyone else just dim satellites. Every one of her steps got attention. Every word was swallowed as if it were gospel. Anne watched from the sidelines like someone witnessing a play where she already knew the ending. But this time, the ending wasn't tragic, it was sickening. Literally. Her stomach twisted like it was trying to throw up years of silence. Ellie noticed, she always did. She squeezed her mother's hand tighter, those tiny fingers pleading without words, and squeezed back gently, trying to hold herself together. But inside it was like being trapped in a script written by someone else. A plot where the villain wins before the hero even steps on stage, and no one around them noticed the irony. The man beside the bride was staring straight at the only truth that could flip the whole finale. Ellie's eyes scanned the room. Big, too big for her face, eyes that carried an ancient kind of blue, a curve in the gaze inherited from another face, the same one on the groom, the same look that had once made an end feel visible, years ago. There, in that room filled with expensive flowers and fake smiles, no one saw it, but a child's eyes never lie. And secrets have a shelf life. Hers was about to expire. Ellie had always been the kind of child who saw what adults tried to hide. While she munched on a colorful treat in the corner of the hall, her eyes locked onto something. The man in the light gray suit, laughing beside the bride. She chewed slowly, like puzzle pieces were clicking into place in her mind. Then she turned to her mom and said, in that small, razor-sharp voice, "That's my daddy, isn't it?" Anne froze. There was no time to think, only feel. The words hit like a stone tossed into still water, and the ripple was instant. The noisy, flowery room turned to vacuum. The gold decorations, the string music, the whispering conversations, all vanished. Only the echo of that question remained, ringing inside her. The kind of question no one teaches a child to ask, and no one knows how to answer. Anne's heart raced as if it wanted to escape before the rest of her could move. She looked at Ellie, who still stood there, eyes innocent but too sure. It was like her daughter had pierced through years of silence with a single arrow. And in that moment, anew, all the time she had spent shielding her daughter from the truth was over. Because children feel, and some, like Ellie, feel too deeply to pretend they don't know. And knelt slowly, as if trying to anchor a world spinning out of control. Her tear-brimmed eyes tried to mask the panic, but her voice came out shaky. "Don't say that, my love. Please, let's go now, okay?" Ellie just looked at her, not fully understanding, but feeling everything. Children don't need explanations when the air changes. And right then, the air was thick, full of something she couldn't name, but already feared. Anna picked her up with careful urgency, like she was running from a fate already written. Her heart pounded so loud it echoed in her ears. Her hands were sweaty, her eyes darted everywhere, searching for an exit that didn't lead her straight back into the past. Every step felt like tripping over memory. Every face she passed was a mute threat. She just wanted to vanish, to take Ellie to a world where daddy wasn't a curse. But you can't outrun pain. It's like smoke, it follows you, slips through cracks. Anne moved like someone fleeing a fire, and maybe it was one, a fire made of broken promises, buried memories, and all the silences she had swallowed for years. Now, holding in her arms the purest secret she'd ever known, all she wanted was to disappear before the flames spread. But fate, that sarcastic screenwriter, didn't let her escape clean. The moment Anne turned a corner to slip away, time pulled a cruel trick. He was there, James the groom, standing in her path like a memory too solid to ignore. His eyes instinctively found hers, and when they did, there was no mask left, only shocked doubt, a past crashing into the present without knocking. And froze. Ellie, still in her arms, looked on with quiet calm, and then, with a soft, almost magical motion, she smiled. A pure smile, innocent, and that was all it took. James staggered back, like he'd taken a punch to the gut, and didn't he know where it came from? The child's gaze pierced through all the walls he'd built over the years. It was like looking into a mirror from the past. A piece of him that had been ripped away now returned, in miniature. The silence between them was deafening. The ceremony buzzed behind them with laughter, string music, and small talk. But here, in this velvet-shadowed corridor, something was breaking. Something nameless, but instantly known. A connection, a blood tie, a truth. And the moment Ellie looked up again with those same pale blue eyes, James knew the life he thought he lost was right there, in the arms of the woman he had once walked away from. The bells began to chime, their golden sound filling the air like a royal command. Guests straightened in their seats, faces full of painted-on smiles, slipping into the script of perfection no one dared to question. Everything was polished, planned, perfect. But inside everything trembled. Ellie squirmed in her arms, her eyes dancing over the crowd like she was searching for something, or someone, and whispered, "Stay right here, baby," but it was already too late. The procession began. The music rose, the bride appeared at the far end of the aisle, surrounded by tulle and orchids, like a mirage, and held her breath, clutching Ellie tightly. But the girl slipped from her arms with the ease of someone born to surprise. She ran down the center aisle, arms wide open, tiny shoes tapping like war drums against polished stone. Every step toward the ceremony opened. Right in front of the altar, she stopped, looked straight at James, and shouted, "Daddy!" It wasn't a question, it wasn't a cry. It was a verdict, a lightning strike across the chapel. The veil paused mid-air. The musicians missed a note. The bride froze. The groom swayed. And the world, for one eternal moment, shattered in slow motion. Everything fake fell apart. Only the truth remained, standing in the middle of the aisle, arms open wide, eyes full of legacy. Time didn't just stop metaphorically. It truly stopped. like someone had hit the pause button on reality. The orchestra went silent. The wedding march disappeared. All eyes turned to the center of the aisle. The bride stood stunned, eyes wide. James stood too, breath held. Only Ellie moved, arms raised like this. Altar was just another safe place to play pretend love, and tried to run after her, but her body refused. Her legs shook like they were filled with lead. Her heart raced, but her feet stayed glued to the past. To that rooftop night, to the pharmacy test, to the feverish silent nights. Everything returned in a rush, and there, like a painting come to life, stood her daughter, small, brave, alone, under the weight of every stare in the room. James bent down slowly, like each vertebra carried years of absence. His knees hit the ground in a kind of reverence. His eyes met Ellie's, and they didn't blink. It was like he was staring at a living photograph, a fragment of what was and what could have been. And in that space between disbelief and IOE, he understood it was real. Those eyes were his. That soul was his, even if no one had ever told him. The scream shattered the air like glass. Sharp, wild animal. She shrieked, "What is this? Who is this child?" Her voice bounced off the stained glass windows, smashing the fake piece that hung over the altar. She shoved a floral arrangement, stumbled against the altar cloth, and tripped on her own heel. Her veil fluttered like a war flag. It was the perfect scene for a dynasty collapsing under spotlights. The guests reacted like an audience caught in a live scandal. Some whispered. Some filmed with trembling phones. No one moved. Everyone knew what they were witnessing. Anne remained frozen. She felt every gaze stabbing into her like pins. Judgment, confusion, scandal, but she didn't move. All she wanted was to protect Ellie, to disappear. James, still kneeling, looked at his daughter, then up at Anne, and in that silence, between the bride's scream and the crowd's shock, a truth became audible, an old truth, sacred, inconvenient. Anna felt it in her bones, like the whole world was finally seeing what she'd carried alone for so many years. There was no turning back. The box was open, and now, in front of everyone, pretending was no longer an option. That little girl was his, and now, the entire world knew. The chaos around them swelled like a tide, but James didn't move. He stayed kneeling, frozen in front of a truth that now had a name, a face, and his eyes. With every heartbeat, another memory clawed its way up from the grave where he had buried it. That rooftop, their fingers intertwined. Her perfume on his shirt, that shy laughter, that night when the world finally made sense. It all came back, and hurt more now than when it was gone. And he understood. Finally, he never forgot, and he never stopped feeling. He just obeyed. He buried what they had because they told him to. He remembered his father's voice, cold as marble. That girl no longer exists. If you insist, you're out of the name, out of the legacy. And he gave in, weak, cowardly. Someone who learned to deny what he felt to preserve what he had. But now, everything he had felt small compared to what he'd lost. The woman, the child. James felt his chest burn, like the memory was charging interest. There, at the altar where he was supposed to celebrate a lie, everything inside him screamed for the only truth he'd tried to forget. The past wasn't dead. It was kneeling beside him, holding an invisible ribbon between three broken hearts. And now that the truth stood before him, it hurt more than all those silent years, because it wasn't theory anymore, it was presence. A daughter, small and real, with eyes carrying the same weight he tried to ignore. She was the thread that had survived it all. The orders, the threats, the polished lies of the Whitmore name. James's chest tightened like he couldn't breathe, but it was just guilt, finally showing up. The memories hit like wind slamming a door. The crumpled letter he never had the courage to send. The nights he dialed her number and deleted it. The mornings he stared into the mirror and whispered, "I'm fine," knowing he was lying. Anne's face, head tied up, eyes fierce, had never left him. She was in every woman he tried to love. In every day he pretended to move on, but now, there, standing before the girl who carried his blood, and the woman who carried his story, something shifted. It wasn't redemption, it was courage. The kind that lets you lose everything just to gain something real. James closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. If the price of truth was the fall of an empire, so be it, because nothing was worth more than those two souls in front of him. The bride was now screaming like a wounded animal, her makeup smeared in panic. James's parents crossed the aisle like judges arriving late to a scandal, but he didn't hear them. Everything around him was muffled noise. Guilt burned through every excuse, every elegant lie. He stood, he didn't shout, he didn't beg, but his voice carried weight, the kind that rattles bones. I was forbidden from looking for her. They told me she'd disappeared, that it was better to forget. The words echoed like gunshots through the elegant hall, but James kept going. I believed them. They made me believe it, and I let them. Cowardly, yes, but I never stopped feeling. Then he turned, looked for and found her. She was still holding Ellie, her arms shaking, her face stunned, but she didn't run. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just looked at him, like someone seeing a place they tried to erase from the map. And in that look, no words were needed, but everything was understood. Anaya saw his eyes clean. For the first time, there was no arrogance, no performance, just a man standing in the rubble of his own choices. And even though her chest still bled, there was one thing no one could deny. He was telling the truth, and that was what hurt the most. She wanted to run, to scoop Ellie into her arms and vanish like smoke. Flee that altar, those people, that breathing memory now standing in front of her. The tears burned behind her eyes but wouldn't fall. It was like her body had grown too tired even to cry, like it had learned to hold back even pain. Why now? She thought, caught between rage and vertigo. Why does he remember only now? Why now when I've already learned to live without him? Her heart pounded like it was begging to be heard. But pride roared louder, hurling images like shrapnel. The loneliness, the insults, the unanswered nights, the birthdays he missed. Each memory was a stone pressing against her ribs, and that pulled Ellie closer, her shield and her anchor. And then his voice broke through, low, wounded, real. I won't let you leave again. I lost you once. I'm not making the same mistake. She didn't answer. But inside, something faltered, because, for the first time, he didn't sound like the billionaire from the rooftop, or the ghost in her dreams. He sounded like a man trying to return, and what Anne didn't want to admit was that part of her was still listening. James's parents moved toward him like rolling barricades, hurling whispered threats and frozen stares. The bride no longer wept. She screamed. Her mascara ran in angry rivers, her hands trembling between begging and rage. You're leaving me here, you're throwing everything away. But James didn't blink, didn't back down. The voices around him felt like they came from underwater. He stepped forward, 2 slow, conscious strides, like he was breaking through an invisible wall between who he had become and who he really was. The crowd watched in silence, not out of respect but disbelief. James lifted his chin, took a deep breath, and stripped himself of legacy with a single sentence. If I lose everything, so be it. But I want the truth. I want my daughter. I want the woman I left behind because I was a coward. His voice echoed like an oath. It didn't tremble. It didn't ask for permission. It was the confession of a man who spent a lifetime choosing the easy path, and now, for the first time, was choosing the hard one. No one moved. The entire hall felt suspended, as if everyone was holding their breath waiting for the floor to cave in. And in a way it did, because there he was, a man throwing wealth, status, and his last name to the ground. He was a man, for an old love and a little girl who just wanted to be seen. And in that 1 second, everyone knew this was real. Anne took a breath so deep it felt like she was holding herself up with air. But the room spun. The flowers, the faces, the flashes, everything blurred like a bad dream. The bride's heels clicked in the distance, now just echoes. Anne's breaths came in short bursts, and at the center of the storm, something broke, or maybe something was born. Ellie looked at the two of them with a piece too big for her age. Her smile was small, but sure, like she knew, even without understanding, that the puzzle pieces had finally clicked into place. Anne felt it like a knot untying inside her chest. For the first time in years, she saw James without the armor. He wasn't the rooftop boy, wasn't the heir who vanished. He was a man wounded, yes, but willing to take the hits if that's what it took. Willing not to run again. And that in that exact moment was enough. Even if time had passed, even if pain still lingered between them, and understood something vital. Sometimes love doesn't need to restart clean, it just needs permission to exist, however imperfect. And in that elegant chaos, among shattered masks and broken vows, maybe, just maybe, something new was beginning to bloom. The world doesn't forgive billionaires who break the script. In just a few weeks, James lost it all. The companies, the invitations, the applause. His last name, once synonymous with power, became an awkward silence. Friends vanished. Lawyers called. Tabloid covers screamed scandal. But he didn't bow. With the same determination he used to cross that altar, he walked through the collapse, and at the end of it, he found something he'd never had before. He rented a small house in the countryside, with chipped paint on the windows and the smell of fresh bread from next door. The flowers didn't come from a florist, they grew by accident in the yard, and Anne showed up a few days later. No promises, no speeches. She tested this new world with slow steps, like someone walking on ground that had once given way. But their daughter, she ran through the yard like she'd always belonged there. Her laughter was wild and free, like it was saying, "We're finally home." Money was tight, the future uncertain. But there was something about freshly brewed coffee, the sound of birds, the smell of wet earth, that felt like peace. They didn't know if this would last, but they knew it was real. And for the first time, that was enough. But deep wounds don't heal with silence and hot coffee alone. Old partners sued, the whispers returned. This time printed in headlines. The pressure never fully left. A dark cloud even on blue sky days. James tried to be strong, but the fall had been too recent. And one day, he crumbled, right there, in her arms. No ring, no title, no platform. Just a man with eyes that finally knew what mattered. If I had to lose everything again, I would for you to. His voice came out thin, broken, but true. Anne didn't reply with words. She just held him, with her whole body, with their whole story. There were no guarantees, no perfectly wrapped endings. But there was love, a love that, even bruised, was standing, visible. And, for the first time, life was rebuilt like this, one day at a time. A backyard, a child with bare feet, two grown-ups learning how to live together without masks. And when the night came, and the world finally went quiet, what was left was a shared sigh, a breath between two people who had broken and somehow survived. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Sometimes, that's what saves you.